The day fashion designer Kate Spade took her life, 122 other people did too. And when rock star traveling chef Anthony Bourdain committed suicide, 122 other people committed suicide that day too. In fact, by the time this show is over, 2 more people will have taken their lives. And for every suicide, there are 25 other people who attempt it. I was one of them. I too tried to end my life when I was 13. And at the moment, that seemed like the option, the only one. So we're doing this show because we want to make a change. We want to help you save your loved ones, your friends, your family, your coworkers, your neighbors, maybe even someone you don't know. Because together, we can make an impact. So for the entire show, we're going to have that National Suicide Prevention Lifeline on the bottom of your screen. We're going to tell you the warning signs. We're going to talk to those left behind. We're going to give you some insight and hopefully some hope and give you the tools to potentially save a life. All right, she wrote a story so raw, so real, so haunting about her father's suicide 2 decades ago. And the Washington Post republished it, and journalist Roxanne Roberts has heard from so many people left behind in the aftermath of suicide. She may have even saved a life or 2 or maybe more. Thank you so much for being here, Roxanne.
It's really a pleasure.
It is so wonderful to have you. You have been through so much, and you are such a gifted writer. So important to share your story. Tell me about the people you've heard from after the story was republished.
Well, I think the most important thing, and I've heard from hundreds, and I literally wrote back to every single person who wrote me, is that suicide is still a topic that we don't talk about much. We're afraid to talk about. We're ashamed about it. And it really isn't. Depression isn't something to be ashamed about. Suicide is not something to be ashamed about. But the less we talk about it, the more it stays hidden, and all those complex feelings sort of stay buried. So a lot of the people who wrote me sort of were pouring their hearts out to me because they thought I had given voice to some of the complex feelings that came in the aftermath of a suicide.
Absolutely, and you wrote in very vivid detail, you know, lots of things that really stayed with me, stayed with so many people, you know, cleaning up blood, cleaning up your life afterwards, so many things that just really hit people.
For every person that kills themselves, there are probably a dozen people who live with the aftermath of that. And what I'm trying to do, and what I try to do with that piece, is to help people give voice to not just their grief, but their anger and their confusion and their shame and a lot of guilt. There's so much guilt. And we want to do everything we can to help somebody who is depressed and dealing with suicidal thoughts. But I also want to help everybody who is left behind to try to process this crisis in their life and help them understand that they didn't do anything wrong if someone they love kills themselves.
So we talked about if someone dies from cancer, we know what to say. We're very sorry, but when someone dies from suicide, people don't know really what to say to the people left behind.
They don't, and they also tend not to give people permission to feel anything but sadness, like any other death. And suicide is just more complex than that. People feel anger, people feel abandoned. Some of the emails I got were unbelievably heartbreaking because those lingering feelings have gone on for decades and they just didn't feel they could really share them. The article at least gave people a way to say, here are some of the things I've been feeling about all these years. And you know, I've heard from people in their 80s and some in their 90s, as well as some very young people. It doesn't change. The feelings don't change regardless of when this happens to you or how it happens. It's just devastating.
What should you say? That's a lot of what we want to do here tonight is give people the tools to say the right thing. What would be the right thing?
I think the first thing is if you have someone in your home who is depressed, you say, you have nothing to be ashamed of. This is a disease, you know, that it takes strength to ask for help. It's not a weakness. And you are not at fault for being depressed. But I do think people who are depressed have a responsibility to try to get help. And most of the time, people who love them want them to get help, even if the person who's depressed thinks that the world would be better off if they weren't there. The other thing I'd say is once a suicide has happened in your family, you don't have anything to be ashamed about. Something terrible has happened to the person you loved, and something terrible has happened to you. And you need permission to talk about all the complex sadness and the what ifs and everything that goes reeling. It's perfectly natural to want to protect the people we love, and sometimes we can't do it. And that part is so heartbreaking if someone dies. But a suicide probably is the worst death in terms of those feelings.
It's very hard to get over, and I appreciate so much you being here, and thank you for your gift. Telling your story really helps other people to tell theirs. Roxanne Roberts with the Washington Post. So suicide kills more teens than cancer, more than drugs and alcohol too. And when we're young, we can think that how we're feeling is how we're always going to feel. So I've been there, and I'm lucky that I picked the wrong pills. That's what saved me when I was a teen. But for 16-year-old Hannah Lucas of Georgia, it was her mom walking in the room. Now, she and her brother are helping to give others that same opportunity, that moment when a person walks in the room, texts or calls, and in turn, it's helping give their lives purpose.
I developed eating disorders, I self-harmed, and I even attempted suicide. And that was, without a doubt, the darkest moment in my life.
For Hannah Lucas, it was her mom walking in the room at just the right moment that saved her life. Later, that gave Hannah an idea, and she told it to her 13-year-old brother, Charlie.
When she told me about her idea for the app, this was the one thing that I could actually help her with.
Charlie got to work. Through Hannah's depression, he'd been feeling helpless. He started developing the Not Okay app.
The Not Okay app is essentially a digital panic button that, when pressed, it sends a text message to your pre-selected up to 5 closest contacts.
Because Hannah says when you're in the throes of depression, and hers was brought on by a long illness and bullying, sometimes crafting a simple text message can seem insurmountable.
And the message says, "Hey, I'm not okay. Come call me, text me, or come check up on me."
The two are seeing lots of success. More than 20,000 people have downloaded it. They've got an investor, they won an award, and they found a purpose that came from a deep pain.
The biggest lie depression always tells you is that you're alone and nobody cares about you. But your friends and your family are there to help.
Two smart teens making a difference. We've got a link to their website where you can download the app on ours, WUSA9.com. Well, 22 veterans die by suicide every day, but there is hope. Next, we're going to hear from a veteran who's going to share his struggle with mental health. 20 veterans take their lives every day. So Dr. Caitlin Thompson helps veterans at Cohen Veterans Network, and Vardly St. Preux, is a veteran who's been helped by them. Thank you both so much for being here. I want to ask you first, Dr. Thompson, give us an idea of the size of the issue.
I mean, the size of the issue is huge. We know, particularly for veteran suicide, veterans lose their lives to suicide about twice as much as non-veterans. And so we know that this is specifically a population that we need to be so aware of and so careful about watching out for any sort of signs that they may be feeling in any way distressed, in crisis, or suicidal. And then to have those resources. I love that you have up the Lifeline number at the bottom of the screen. If you dial that number and press 1, you'll immediately be directed to the Veterans Crisis Line that is specifically for veterans who are suicidal. And so with the VA, with the Cohen Veterans Network, and other places, veterans have a choice, because one of the things that I want to stress to you and to all of your listeners is that when you're feeling suicidal or you're feeling depressed, you can get better. People actually do get better. And so it's walking people through that space where you can hold your hand to get them the help that they may need.
It's all about having hope and giving people hope. And speaking of hope, Vardly, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks
and let's hear a little bit about your story. You had been deployed to Afghanistan twice, and you're telling me you lost quite a few people.
Yeah, so during the middle of my deployment, I lose my mother. And during, to cope with that in itself was an issue. And then towards the end of the deployment, we lost 6 people on just a routine test flight. So this was totally unexpected. Coming back home, transitioning out of the military, you go from having all these comrades and all these people around you to just you by yourself. And that's
feeling
the loneliest
alone.
place. That's the loneliest place. You start having friends, the Triple J's, right? Johnny Walker, Jim Beam, and Jack Daniels, right? And then you start spiraling down, and you start surrounding yourself with toxic relationships, right? And you just add on to that spiral.
And you went to the Cohen's Veterans Network as well.
Right.
And tell me about what happened when you found them.
Well, they found me.
They found you.
I mean, I was in
They're that good.
it was just something that was probably written in the stars.
Wow.
Because if they didn't find me, I was living out of a car, and if they didn't find me, who's to say what situation would have happened? Because it was the bottom of depression for me. I hit rock bottom, and now it just, with the reprogram, that's what I call it. The reprogram, and to start seeing the silver lining, in everything I do. I mean, what she was talking about is 100% true. Once you have your focus realigned, right? There's nothing you can't handle. And I feel an obligation now to help my fellow comrades, brothers and sisters in arms, coming home to deal with this. So everything from starting a business to even putting myself out there to run for District 20 Senator, to tackle these kind of issues from our General Assembly / senatorial level, state senatorial level. I'm all in. I'm all in.
Thank you for your service, and thank you for what you do to help other people. Tell me a little bit, we have a little bit of time left. Dr. Thompson, what does Cohen's Veteran Network, just to get a little bit about what they do?
So we've set up clinics throughout the country, and we actually have one right in Silver Spring, our Silver Spring Clinic, which is the Cohen Network with Easter Seals, and we partner with these organizations. We do evidence-based treatment, and it's free service. It's a nonprofit. Any veteran, their family member, and family members of service members who may be struggling can come and get their treatment at one of our clinics, and we welcome any of that. And you can reach us, you can find us at www.cohenveteransnetwork.org.
Awesome. We'll have that information on our website too.
you.
I thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you, Deborah.
Well, you know what? They started the most recent conversation, and of all people, they seem to have it all, right? Money, success, fame. Well, one of my first jobs in TV was with Anthony Bourdain's first show, and I may not even be here sitting at this desk if it wasn't for him. The same goes for acclaimed food and travel producer Diane Schutz, who traveled the world with him for 10 years.
I would never have expected that from him. It's only in hindsight that we realized, well, okay, he did have a dark sense of humor. Maybe he did seem a little depressed, but you always think to yourself, well, that's just Tony. Tony is a lovable curmudgeon. He lives for his daughter. Everything is for his daughter. I remember a year or two ago getting an email from a famous chef in Copenhagen. Hey, can Tony come out to this event in August? And he said, no, sorry, August is for my daughter. And as we know, you never know what demons someone is battling on the inside. He is pretty much exactly as you see him on TV. He can be really acerbic, but he could be a mush at times. I went to places I never could have imagined, deep in the jungles of Panama, in the jungles of Thailand and Peru, in the outback of Australia, in the kitchens of some of the top restaurants in the world, Noma in Copenhagen and El Bulli in Spain. And it's just been an priceless experience. And I feel so grateful to have had this. I think there's the expression, something along the lines of, well, don't be sad that he's gone. Be grateful and happy that we had him as long as we did. But it's still, a life cut too short.
He had so much more to give. If you want to see more behind-the-scenes photos from Diane's time with Tony, or also this video right here, really funny, Tony and I moving my car for alternate side of the street parking in New York City. We're going to have all of that on our WUSA 9 app. If you're struggling with mental health, we wanted you to know that there is hope. And next, we're going to be talking to a psychologist about breaking the stigma of depression and not suffering in silence. Thanks for coming back with us here on Off Script. I want you to meet now Dr. Nicole Cutts. She's a clinical psychologist and founder of Vision Quest Retreats. Let's get right to it, Doc. What are the signs of depression and what are the signs of suicide?
Okay, well, we'll start with depression. Some of the signs of depression are talk that contains hopeless language, despairing language, negative language, being down on oneself, things like nobody likes me, I can't do anything right, really self-disparaging talk. Withdrawing from activities that people previously enjoyed. That's because people who are depressed are not feeling pleasure in things that they used to feel pleasure in. Withdrawing in general from other people. For some people, it can show up as irritability. Their mood can be very labile, very up and down. Not having a lot of energy. People's sleep is often disturbed. Their eating is disturbed. Those are some of the signs of depression. When it comes to somebody who's contemplating suicide, that can be even increased more, of course. Somebody who's depressed for a long time, and as we talked about earlier, even sometimes when somebody's been depressed for a long time, and then you suddenly notice a uptick in their energy, that can also be a sign that that person is contemplating suicide, or maybe even has a plan because they might see relief on the horizon, or they've gotten a little bit of energy, which can also be a dangerous time for people who are contemplating suicide.
So what do you say? What's the right thing to say? Because you don't want to say the wrong thing.
Right. Well, there's no one right prescription, but I think that telling somebody that you're concerned about them, showing them that you're there for them, and listening to them without judgment, as Roxanne was saying earlier, saying there's nothing to be ashamed of. It takes a lot of bravery to reach out and get help. Can be very important. But I think the most important thing is normalizing it for the other person, that they can talk to you about it. And also, you might want to ask them, are you thinking about harming yourself? Have you thought about doing anything to yourself? And people are uncomfortable saying that, but that's a sign that somebody might be close to committing suicide, is if they've actually contemplated a plan of any sort.
And talking about this is so important because of the stigma. There is such a huge stigma about being depressed, seeing a psychologist, having suicidal thoughts. What can we do to get rid of this?
We need to understand, as we've said over and over, that this really is a physical illness. It is an illness that people can see on functional MRIs. You can see changes in people's brain. It can be both chemical as well as structural. So it really is a physical illness, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. And mental illness is often distinguished from physical illness because we tend to think we can will ourselves through it, and that's just not the reality.
Exactly. Real quick before we go to break, is there any difference between men and women, people of different backgrounds, anything in how they perceive this?
I think, depending on socioeconomic status, education, exposure, people might have different attitudes toward mental health and mental illness. But we need to work on eradicating the stigma wherever it is, and it really does exist across all ethnic and racial and religious lines. And I think the thing that's most important is shining a light on this stigma wherever it is.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cutts. We appreciate it. You're going to stick around, and we'll be right back. Okay, I came across this Facebook page a while back. A dad from New Jersey named Dennis started it after his son, 17-year-old Dylan, took his life. Now, this is called a kindness challenge, and it's a place to lift others up and inspire acts of kindness, all in Dylan's memory. It was originally just for family and friends, but now there's more than 150,000 people who are part of it. And that's the thing about kindness. I have all my guests here with me, and we all know kindness grows. So you can help prevent suicide, and you can do it by starting a conversation, really. And when people answer, just to listen without judgment, go out of your way, make that call, give someone a compliment, right? And if you need any help, we are here. We're going to be on Facebook Live on WUSA 9 right after the show. Thank you so much for being with us and watching Off Script.